Hello all and welcome. My name is Margaret. I'm a historical costumer and textile conservator in training, and today we have the last video in my sort of introduction to art conservation series. Video 1, of course, was what is art conservation, then we talked about how one becomes an art conservator and some of the pros and cons of the field, and then last week we talked about my conservation story, journey, how I got into this field. All of those will be in the playlist in the card above and also down below if you are interested in viewing those. And throughout this series of videos, I asked if anybody had questions about art conservation so I could answer them in this video for you. Now, I didn't get a ton of questions, but they were very interesting, so I thought we would have a short little video going over the questions that I did get. So Catherine Donnelly asks, and she had a very lovely, long, thought-out comment on whether art conservation is considered public history. I don't think art conservation falls within the bounds of public history, but I also think that that is an issue. So art conservation for a long time has been quite a secretive field, and that is for several reasons. One of those reasons, especially in paintings conservation and object conservation, when you're working with high value, high monetary value objects, they're concerned that a lot of research and scientific analysis being published about these objects will lead to, quote, a forger's handbook. So there's that aspect of sort of the secretiveness, but also it's just kind of been one of those things where conservators have just, our goal for the longest time was not to be seen. In our work especially, the conservator's job is not to put their own mark on the artwork, but in fact to be invisible, and that's sort of translated into our relationship with the public. Now, there's a lot of people actively trying to change that, actively trying to voice the beauty and the wonders of art conservation and how it is important in keeping our cultural heritage and history alive in our society. This YouTube channel is an example of that. There are many other examples of that. Conservators are often part of community engagement, etc., etc. Lab tours sort of opening up to the public, opening up our spaces, not only so that the public can see us in action, but also to diversify who in fact is a conservator, who becomes conservators. You know, we need people to be interested in different things so that everything, to an extent, gets worked on. We get excited about it, gets to be in the public eye. So that's why I don't think it is public history, because we are not currently that public facing. It is a part of public history. It often is an important step in getting places and things and objects to a point where they can be viewed by the public, but currently I don't really see it being part of public history. Maybe my definition of public history is different than other people's. Definitions are something that people debate very often in this field. So hopefully they answered that question. Honestly, it's kind of an ongoing saga. Now, Jessica V asked a very important question, and one that we will probably get into many, many times on this channel in the future, and that is the idea of restoration versus preservation. I'm going to preface this again. The difference between the terms restoration and preservation are coming from a very North American perspective. In other languages and across the world, those are often used interchangeably, and they're not necessarily different. In the North American context, conservation is seen as this very professional, scientific, has ethics way of doing things. We'll talk about that in a second. Versus restoration is the sort of unprofessional, not bound by the ethics of the conservation community kind of side of things. The context which I see restoration is, it is a person trying to use a historical object as a new object and potentially erasing the history in that process. So for instance, if you have watched Antiques Roadshow in the last 20 years, you know when they get a piece of furniture in, it's often seen as, quote, fake, because parts of it have been taken away. The original varnish isn't there anymore. The original hardware isn't there anymore. Maybe it's a case cupboard that's been put together in a different weird ways. That is something that may have come from the consequences of a restoration. Getting rid of those original parts, those parts that make it special purely for aesthetics or purely for functionality purposes within someone's home. In conservation, any sort of intervention should be two things: permanent, but reversible. Those might seem in conflict with each other, but those are very important aspects of our profession. Anything we do, we want it to stay there. You know, we want it to work. We want the consolidation. We want our patches to stay so that the object is stable and can be displayed or housed safely. But we also want to be able to identify it and reverse it if further down the line new research comes out or tastes have changed in display preferences. So we're really in the business of not doing anything that is going to harm the historical integrity of the object further down the line. That's different with restoration, which is not bound by that goal and thus oftentimes can do some damage to the object. That isn't a perfect world. In the real world that we actually live in, oftentimes conservators will have to go down a more restoration-y route because if the taste of a private client or the taste of a conservator, and we're really straddling the ethical line between what keeps the integrity of the object versus what someone wants to use the object for. For instance, you know, in a perfect world, maybe we wouldn't in-paint things, but those holes are visually distracting and they're not conducive to the artist's vision. Therefore, we in-paint things with paints that you can easily see are in-painting paints, because if you look at it under UV, they're dark. Maybe you have a private client who wants to use something, an antique fabric for upholstery, and you're just like, well, that's what they gotta do, you know? So it's, the ethics on this are blurred. They're different for every person, they're different for every institution, but really in conservation, especially in textile conservation, less is more. We try to stabilize the object, but not be intrusive to it, so that its historical value is still very pertinent and can shine through. So hopefully that dipped our toes into that question. Again, we will talk about, this is like the big ethical question, is like, how much treatment is appropriate? What should we be doing? How do we maintain historical value while also making sure that the object is stable? Like, this is the great pendulum of art conservation. Helped a little bit, but again, we'll keep talking about this subject. It will come up again. Quixart asked a question. They're new, they're trying to get into art conservation, and they want to know what people are looking for in intern applicants, especially those who do not have any prior experience. So this is a difficult question to answer because every internship is going to be looking for different things. Every supervisor is going to be looking for different things, but there are two main aspects that you should really focus on in order to show that you are a good applicant. The first is, of course, enthusiasm. You want to be enthusiastic. You want to say, hey, I've looked into this. This is something I want to try. This is art conservation I want to try, and I would love to try it at your institution because I'm excited about this particular institution. You know, make that into something that is more specific and sounds more unique to you, but essentially be enthusiastic about the position, make them know that this is something you've looked into, you kind of know a bit about art conservation, but you obviously need some hands-on experience to learn more. And the second one, and this is most important, is to show that you have good hand skills. Hand skills are very important in art conservation. They're one of the three little leggy legs of the stool of art conservation. So it's important to show that you have them, whether that is, you know, putting on your resume that you have sewing skills, or that you've done studio art classes, or maybe you've worked at a frame shop or a print shop, or some type of other experience that shows that you can work with your hands and you can do analogous things to conservation. So those are the two things I would definitely focus on when applying to your first internship, when getting into art conservation. Again, we talked about that in the How to Become an Art Conservator video. I'll link that down below. It's in the playlist. Go check it out. And to round out this shorter video, Constance asked how to care for antique whites. Now, if you don't know the dress history or conservation lingo, antique whites normally refer to garments from the Victorian and Edwardian period that are made of all white cotton. So these are normally undergarments and specifically lingerie dresses of the Edwardian period. And I actually had a lot of antique whites come in. I have an Etsy store. I sell things sometimes on Etsy. I'll link it down below. Antique whites are a very common thing and oftentimes need to be washed because cotton goes through an acidic degradation process by just being exposed to oxygen, which creates that yellowing effect on the cotton. And rinsing out those byproducts is very helpful for the longevity of the cotton object, and it is one of the only wet cleaning treatments which I think that you can do at home. I don't advise that you wet clean antique garments or antique fabrics on your own. I would send those to a conservator, or just not wash them is totally fine too. You don't need to wash them. It's fine, unless there's something in there that's potentially harmful to you, potentially harmful for the garment. Acidic degradation is harmful to white garments and is actually very easy to get out. You're not going to deal with dye bleed. You're going to be okay for the most part. So in a conservation setting, if everything was perfect and you had a conservation lab in your house, you would be using a flat, wet tank. You would be using deionized or distilled water. You would have a lot of space. You would have a lot of time. You would have a lot of resources, right? But at home, a large basin, bucket, or bathtub will work. So you can see in this footage, I am using my little half bath. Use, room temperature water, very easy, and let your garment soak in there for a couple of hours. That is going to take out the majority of the acidic degradation byproduct. Now this is very important. Do not bleach it. Do not use chlorine bleach. Okay, don't. Just don't. It breaks down the fibers way more than is necessary. I've seen so many Edwardian lingerie dresses on the market where someone has clearly bleached it and now there are a bunch of holes and the fabric is really weak because you put bleach on it. Don't do that. It's not worth it. Getting it that white is not worth it. If you want to use a little detergent, I suggest Orvis, which is sodium lauryl sulfate. You can find this at specialty quilt shops a lot of the times, or you can buy larger quantities, which they use for washing livestock. Fun fact. But it's decently easy to get your hands on. It's decently affordable. You can also use another type of light detergent that doesn't have any dyes or fragrances in it. And just mix up a small solution of that, dab it on to the garment while it is as flat as you can get it, and then make sure to rinse all of that Orvis out and lay it flat to dry. If you have sort of tulle or net laying around, you can stuff out the object so that it dries in a nice position. And then if you need to get out any wrinkles, I would suggest steaming, not ironing. So that is how you take care of your antique whites at home. Again, TLDR, don't bleach it, don't bleach it, don't bleach it. Okay? Hand wash, let it soak, use a light detergent, air dry. That is how you take care of your antique whites. But again, I do not recommend laundering antique garments unless it is a white garment and it is in relatively good condition that it's not going to fall apart. So there you go, Constance. That's how you do antique whites. Now, if you do have any more questions for me, you can pop them down below. I'll be in the comments in and out as always. And you can also go over to my Instagram, ask questions there. And I will be back in a couple of weeks. I know my uploads I've been doing this series every week, but I am going to be slowing down in a couple of weeks with a conservation treatment for you. Very exciting. I apologize for whatever is happening outside of my window. You probably heard some sirens in this. Yeah. It's New York City. I can't change it myself. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this one. You can go over on Instagram and TikTok at costumeandconservation. You can follow me here. And you know what? You can just have a fabulous day. I'll see you later. Bye.